Canada's most distinguished and experienced engineer provides strategic advice on matters of critical importance to Canada. The Academy is an independent, self-governing, and non-profit organization established in 1987 and is one of the 3 national academies that makes up the Council of Canadian Academies. We have over 800 fellows from across Canada. All of whom have made significant contributions to the engineering in Canada in the private, public, and academic sectors. So I'm proud to present the first ever symposium of a series of seminars organized by the Academy. The goal of these activities is to provide an opportunity for experts and engineers to exchange views on important national issues. Today, our keynote speaker, John McDougall, will present the concept of developing a national infrastructure corridor in partnership with Indigenous communities. This will be followed by a panel discussion with Réal Laporte and Marshall Kern. I wish to thank our speaker as well as our moderator, Axel Meisen. So let me now introduce Axel. So Axel advised board and senior management in Canada and abroad on strategy development of major initiatives with long-term time horizons. Examples of projects he works include the Global North, the Bitumen Beyond Combustion, the solid waste management in the Capital Regional District of British Columbia, and environmental technology and management in Saudi Arabia. Axel held the inaugural chair in foresight at the Alberta Research Council after serving as president of Memorial University of Newfoundland, president of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, and dean of applied science and professor of the University of British Columbia. He was appointed to the Order of Canada in 2008. So Axel has bachelor, master, doctorate degrees in chemical engineering from Imperial College London, California Institute of Technology, and McGill University, respectively. So I will pass the floor at this stage to Axel, who will be presenting our keynote speaker and moderate the discussion. Thank you, all of us. Axel, it's up to you.
Thank you very much, Yves, for this kind introduction. I look forward to chairing the panel of the Northern Infrastructure Corridor seminar today. I will briefly introduce each speaker and his topic before calling on the speaker to give his presentation. After the first presentation, there will be some time for questions and answers. I will then call on the next speaker using the same process. And after our third speaker, there will be an opportunity to put questions to all the panelists, and more than one panelist may wish to respond to a question. So let us start with our lead speaker. He is John McDougall. John is a co-founder of the C2C2C Citizens Initiative. John is well known in Canadian and international engineering circles, having served as president of the Alberta Research Council and more recently as president of the National Research Council of Canada. Further information on John's background is given in the announcement of the seminar. John will speak on the concept of a Northern Infrastructure Corridor. And as you will see, this is a thought-provoking concept. At this point in time, our Academy neither endorses nor opposes the concept. It believes that this concept and similarly large concepts merit careful consideration by the fellows of the CAE and by others. So John, may I ask you to give your presentation?
So now we'll see if we can bring it up here. Just hang on.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're ready to go.
Indeed.
So thank you, Axel, and merci Yves. Bonjour à tous. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to this wonderful discussion. I'd like to thank the Academy for the opportunity to present the C2C2C Unity Corridor Foundation concept. I'm privileged to chair it. Sometimes I wonder when you take on the chairmanship role if you're just the last man standing, but actually it turns out that we've got a wonderfully active group with many people contributing lots of time and effort. And what I'm going to talk about today is not new in the sense of new concepts for Canada. Corridors have been important to Canada. In fact, our country largely was built on them. But I think what I hope you'll find is that our C to C model incorporates many new elements and approaches that we think are very important for moving forward. Now, how do we get this to do something? There we go. So this foundation was established earlier this year. It's a not-for-profit organization. We'll ultimately have 15 directors from across Canada. And its primary idea is as a vehicle to help better understand and support really the need for social and economic development in the country, and to think about ways in which it can happen. Now, this foundation was established after many months of work by a volunteer team, and we're now in the process of spreading across the country. The foundation is not actually going to build corridors, but we do plan to try to create the relationships and legislative frameworks, governance and business models that will allow them to proceed, hopefully in a sensible and more certain economic manner, while being environmentally and socially sustainable. I'd like to start by thinking a little bit about some of the challenges that we face, not just as a country, but as a world. This list is in no way complete, but it highlights some of the major challenges confronting us, from climate change to decarbonization to trade, but of course also we're now living through the pandemic. And it would sometimes make us believe that maybe the world is a tough place. And I guess it has been and can be. But when we really look at it, the lives of billions of people have actually been substantially improved over the past 200 years. Notwithstanding that, we still face some real challenges. And those challenges are largely due to rising population. Rising population means more energy use, more food production, more resource extraction, more consumer products and services, and so on. And while much has been done to try to deal with some of these impacts, lots remains. Almost a third of the population, for example, lacks access to clean, fresh water. People are on the move, as we know, around the world for various reasons, trying to find safer or environmentally better places to live. And COVID's exposed the fragility of our just-in-time extended supply chains. So lots of people know, in fact, most people probably know that things have to change, but they're not really sure how. And what I'm hoping is that the idea I'll present today will give us some ideas about that. Now, in Canada, we're kind of lucky. We live in a really wonderful place. We've generated significant wealth here, predominantly from our resources and from their upgrading and manufacturing. But the reason that that's been able to occur is every 2 or 3 decades, we typically have major infrastructure projects. And certainly at the time of the end of the Second World War, Canada was the 4th largest country in the world. But now we've been struggling, I would say, particularly in the last decade or two, to adjust to global and regional events. And that was true even before COVID. So about 20% of our economy is wealth producing, 80% is redistribution. And so we really have to change those numbers. Our GDP growth has been weak relative to our competition. There are outflows of capital. We're on the receiving end of some trade battles that disrupt a global order. And certainly there's a major debate underway on how to transition to a low carbon world. Now, when we think about Canada relative to other leading nations, our productivity is weak, certainly lags the leaders like the US and Switzerland. Our infrastructure is overloaded, or in some cases it's inadequate or absent. Resource development, which has been the foundation of our country, is increasingly constrained, and knowledge unfortunately leaks out of the country to be exploited in other places. Also, with the COVID experience, our public debt could easily rise by up to $500 billion this fiscal year. So that thinking led me just to maybe pause for a moment and talk a bit about a hypothetical situation, a hypothetical Canadian family. I was thinking about a family that earned, say, an income of $90,000 a year. And we would say, well, that's a pretty good situation. But then I thought, well, maybe they also have $90,000 in debt. And that could be bad, or maybe not, depending on what the debt is for. You know, if it's their house or something like that, that's one thing. But if it's their credit card, it's clearly something else. But if I told you that they're spending $140,000 a year, you'd probably say they were crazy and should be hiring an insolvency consultant and trying to deal with the matter. What's fascinating about those numbers is if you were to add 7 zeros to each of them, they're pretty much where our governments are collectively in Canada today. So we've got some very serious issues. So we're worried about the direct impacts of COVID for sure, but the consequences of spending significantly more than we take in on the revenue side could prove to be even more serious. I would say ignoring revenue is a bit like pushing the carpet across the floor. The fold gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the further we try to push it, the harder it is to continue to do so. And I think unlimited spending, even if it's by governments, inevitably leads to lower incomes, more debt, and reduced household purchasing power. So what we need really is nation building. And nation building is about sustainable progress. Now, sometimes transformational change is required, and I would say that we're probably in one of those sometimes, and that requires a widely shared, coherent, and rational economic and social framework. So there are two sides to the equation. I would say that the recent throne speech focused mostly on the social side and was very aspirational, but it offered really little insight into how those who produce wealth will be encouraged to keep doing so to generate the capital that we need to fund all the public offerings that have been proposed. And we know that when we do that, certainly other countries around the world have demonstrated that when we fail to encourage wealth creation, it doesn't just slow down or stop, it tends to be destroyed. Shortages emerge and inflation often increases, in fact, usually increases. The domestic capital for transitioning to a more desired economic state slips away, and foreign investors shun such places. So all of that was in the background as the C2C2C founders got together to talk about what we ought to do. So when we looked at Canada's future, we realized that we had to rise above political debate and develop an inclusive cross-partisan approach that was really from the ground up. And so we adopted 5 principles. We call them 5 key points. First of all, to achieve our potential, we need a sense of direction. And that means a widely supported vision that benefits all regions, encourages their commitment, and increases collaboration across the country. Now, yes, we should use our knowledge, people, and resource endowment to build cleaner and greener, globally competitive manufacturing and services supply chains. But as a resource-rich country, Canada should also be a major global resource producer, if only because we have 6% of the world's land mass and only a fraction of 1% of the world's population. And we should also acknowledge that resources actually propelled us to be one of the highest standards of living countries in the world. Now, used smartly, and I'll emphasize that, used smartly, resource abundance provides wealth, access to cheap energy, a platform to develop world-leading environmental technology. And we should obviously continually reduce the footprint associated with the development, upgrading, and utilization of our resources. But in recent decades, we've really discouraged resource production altogether, and wealth production in Canada has stalled. And to provide the economic growth we need, that must change. Now, we think that infrastructure clearly is one of the core elements for doing so. Building cleaner value chains and state-of-the-art infrastructure, or requires state-of-the-art infrastructure, and we also need to improve our global access. Now, we know that much of the infrastructure we have is near the US border. It's too much oriented north-south. It's at or near capacity, and much of it is outdated. New infrastructure corridors that support and enable resource development, enable more east-west integration, and open the underserved areas of the country should be necessary components of a resilient and sustainable national strategy. Now, once we've got a strong economy, we still have to share benefits. And I would say by world standards, Canada's been remarkably successful at reducing income inequalities. But the only way we can continue to do this and to support the transition to an economically viable and environmentally sustainable future is with improved collaboration and participation by Indigenous people and by encouraging more wealth creation. So without investment to generate wealth, the benefits won't be there. Now, the good news, if we can do those four things, then social cohesion should almost naturally evolve. And the importance of social cohesion is that it motivates citizens to work together for the common good. And that means whether we're Indigenous, refugees, skilled workers, industrialists, or investors, or whatever. So again, to achieve it, we believe that infrastructure can be the glue to connect and bind us together. A national corridor system opens up opportunities for socially responsible, environmentally sustainable economic growth, and to build it, build in partnerships with Indigenous peoples. It's the foundation for the future. It enables an economic strategy that could develop hundreds of billions of dollars in additional GDP every year, and then as well, the capability to support social development. But we clearly also need a new approach. Up to now, many of our projects have been piecemeal. You can see sort of some of the things that are being talked about on the map. And essentially a pre-developed idea is presented to those who must agree to it. I think we need a more transparent and strategic process where the stakeholders participate in actually crafting the agenda, not just responding to it. And that would make nation building more open and meaningful to all of us. The C2C Unity Corridor Initiative is the model that we arrived at. Our vision in that model is a national infrastructure corridor system to foster national unity, to invigorate foreign and domestic investment, to create more economic opportunities and employment, to open and secure Canada's north, to help achieve greenhouse gas emission targets, and to reaffirm Canada's global leadership as a sustainable and ethical natural resource producer. Now, an economic strategy has to work within a complex system. So there's resources, there's processing, there's adding value, and ultimately there's all the sort of consumer goods and products that come together. But essentially, if we think about it in really simple terms, we consume resources with various amounts of value-added production and processing. So when you look at this in a more holistic way, ultimately we have to put it all together, and we connect all these pieces with physical and human infrastructure. Now there is one school of thought that an economy can be based solely on knowledge, and that may be possible, but probably only on a limited scale, something the scale of Bermuda or the city of London or whatever, because we can't eat or drink knowledge, and knowledge doesn't provide shelter and it doesn't keep us warm. Yes, it certainly does help us do those things, but we always need resources of some form, whether they be plants, animals, minerals, water, and energy. Now, innovation uses scientific capabilities to develop and optimize the processes that deliver on this and build the economic, social, and environmental benefits through the value chains that we build. And so ultimately, we're trying to build value chains that take advantage of our inherent national advantages, sort of our natural national advantages. Value chains that take advantage of national advantages are more sustainable and lead to an economy that's more resilient to outside pressures and events. So resources for Canada are an obvious first step in the stairway to an economically viable, environmentally attractive, socially inclusive, and technologically advanced nation. Infrastructure is a prerequisite for resource development, yes, but also to develop secure supply chains, to give us access to world markets, and to distribute domestic and imported goods. Infrastructure corridors allow us to communicate across Canada's vast expanse. They facilitate defense and national security. They contribute to social development and capacity building, for example, among Indigenous people. Canada has a very long history of infrastructure corridors. Even the early Indigenous had corridors, coastal and inland waterways. About 1850, we began to build physical infrastructure such as the Rideau Canal, Canadian Pacific Railway, Alaska Highway, Trans-Canada Highway, St. Lawrence Seaway, roads to resources, microwave systems, and so on. But we haven't done much recently, and today we're handcuffed by a deficiency estimated to be as high as $1 trillion, according to Ottawa's Advisory Council on Economic Growth. So C2C2C believes that we need to do something about that. So we support a new 7,000 kilometer backbone corridor, about 400 kilometers or so on average to the north of existing population centers. End-to-end costs of putting this in place would be around $200 billion, probably implemented in phases over 2 or 3 decades. Some elements are already in place or emerging, such as the BC LNG route, the upgrading of the Hudson's Bay Railroad, work underway in Quebec, and the Mackenzie River corridors to some degree are in place. And as additional linkages are added, we would expect to see further investment occurring as well, because ultimately this also has to interconnect with all the established infrastructure that's already in place. Now, such a corridor will provide for population growth, for sustainable wealth creation, environmental protection, and First Nations social and economic development. Will also bring their participation. Will reinforce Canada's global leadership position, again, as a sustainable, ethical producer of natural resources. And it should facilitate transition to a lower carbon economy and create new opportunities for Indigenous communities. As this snapshot illustrates, the ultimate value of corridors is in their enabling capacity. You can do all sorts of things, both on the social side and the economic side. Once they're in place, we can build whatever strategic agenda we wish to support. The choice clearly is ours. Maybe to move power back and forth across the country. It may be to bring water service to Indigenous communities. It may be to put high-speed fiber and cloud storage in places where it's more benign environmentally. Ultimately, the tangible and intangible social and economic benefits are enormous and wide-ranging. It'll create tens of thousands of jobs, direct and indirect. It'll lower the cost barrier for northern development. It could easily enable up to $500 billion in annual increase in GDP, which is about $15,000 a person in Canada. And based on current government spending levels, would support about $200 billion in expanded health, education, social, and other programs. With long-term visionary initiatives, it's really up to the people. Young and old, recent and new arrivals, Indigenous or others working together to describe the nature of the country we want in terms of national unity and resilient supply chains, environment, collaboration, social capacity, and personal benefits. So we need to reimagine and redesign Canada for the next century and beyond together. We need to develop a framework to connect Canadians, to increase Indigenous collaboration, to encourage innovation and sustainability, and to generate employment and economic benefits. And we think infrastructure corridors provide such a framework. They're an icon people can get their head around. Then we need a representative organization to facilitate and convene the conversations necessary to build the framework. And we see three main pillars in that process. First is obtaining consensus for a corridor system and a routing plan from multiple stakeholders through the participation and input of Indigenous peoples, rights holders, government jurisdictions, and the public at large. Second, to develop and recommend a governance model that would include pre-approval mechanisms for the corridor itself, so that subsequent construction of any project within the corridor could proceed more efficiently while retaining reasonable project-specific social, environmental benefit cost considerations. And thirdly, to develop a project financing model for projects that develop within a corridor. Now, we're beginning to launch these activities across the country as we speak. Now, as you can, I hope, tell, I'm excited about this potential, but as we reimagine Canada, there are several major issues and constraints that we have to incorporate. We think there's a great opportunity for Indigenous capacity building, training, jobs, company development, equity participation. We can help to secure Canada's north. China, Russia, and others, even the US, are looking rather enviously at our frontier. And if we don't use it, we could easily lose it. Immigration is an interesting thing. Large numbers of people around the world are looking for better, safer places to live. And we could easily envisage a population of 80 to 100 million in Canada by 2050. But that would double or triple consumption and GDP. So that again would require infrastructure to accommodate. We also must be able to survive the transitions that we're trying to make. And this is the transition from carbon intensity, the transitions from COVID and so on. And if we put all of our capital into physical assets, we'll starve or freeze to death. But if we abandon our capital stock, we may not be able to generate the money to pay for the new one. We also have to recognize time. Changing an economy is not like installing an app on a smartphone. It would be a lot simpler if it were, because we just erase the old one and download a new one and get on with life. But that's not the way it tends to work with large capital projects. We've got scale, complexity, interconnectivity, and the life cycle realities of installed capital to take into account. And even when new technology is available, it still takes time to build the facilities. So these things tend to roll over only every generation or two, but it appears like this is one of those times when that can be happening, perhaps to a larger extent than other times. But it really doesn't matter what kind of infrastructure we put in place. It takes time, whether it's moving commodities, electrons, bits and bytes, or goods and products. So finally, what we're doing is trying to reach out to people across the country. We're establishing chapters to help publicize the message. We've brought heavy Indigenous participation into our leadership. We've identified the key tasks and methodologies need to be undertaken. An organization structure has been put in place to carry them forward, and we're engaging public officials across Canada to keep them informed and seek their advice, because if there's anything politicians hate, it's surprises. So C2C, just to conclude, is not an advocate for any individual project. It's a key enabler that can play an important role in building public understanding and support with most project proponents to understand their agendas and needs and help them achieve them. So we're out seeking support of various kinds across the country. We hope some of you will be interested in at least exploring those opportunities. And we think that we're kind of on the doorstep of an opportunity to create a fundamental pivot in Canada's history so that C2C2C is actually a reality instead of a slogan. We can do that by rewriting the way we do infrastructure in Canada, by getting everyone connected so we can pull together and make Canada the cohesive place that it should be. So thank you for your attention, and I hope you'll take some time to get to know this activity better, and hopefully some of you will even consider joining our efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John, for your presentation of a really challenging, interesting, exciting concept. It's a big concept, and you also outlined its drivers and key points. As a result, you took a little bit more time than we had originally budgeted, but I think the magnitude of the project certainly warrants this. I think we'll restrict ourselves to just one or two questions at this point in order to stay on time. And I think there was a question that was posed. Anne-Marie or Christine, can you maybe read it out? And then we get the response from John.
There was one question posted in the chat regarding Nanovit, and Bob Still gave as well a bit of an answer saying that C2C2C is not ignoring Nanovit. I don't know, John, if you want to add anything else to this.
Sorry, I'm not following quite the question on. Yeah,
why was Nanovit not presented in the
sorry, okay. The region of Nunavut
yes,
is the question.
Yes.
Every region is to be part of this activity. If you actually took a look carefully at the map, there's a route which is proposed, the Grays Bay Port and Highway, which would actually connect Nunavut into this whole system.
Yeah, and I can add, Nunavut is very resource rich. And presently quite remote from any directly connecting corridor. Good. In the interest of staying on time, and we will have time at the end to put questions to all of the panelists, may I suggest that we go to our second presenter. And our second presenter is Marshall Kern. Marshall is currently the president of the Bowman Centre for Sustainable Energy, and he also teaches at Nipissing University. Previously, he held senior positions at Dow Chemical, and he now serves on several important major regional boards. Marshall will speak on the important work that the Bowman Centre has done on this work is really relevant to the topic that John has presented. And Marshall will focus particularly on national electrical grids. Marshall, may I invite you to present?
Thank you. I'm ready. Christine or Anne-Marie, are you going to run the slideshow, please? I appreciate very much what John has just presented to us. One of the comments that I've tried to make hasn't been picked up as yet by the mainstream media is that we've built Canada's physical infrastructure over the last 150 years, and that has allowed us to invest extensively in our unique social infrastructure over the last 150 days. We need to make sure that our infrastructure in the future can continue to provide us with the financial resources to proceed. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to discuss this. The next slide, please. We have been focusing attention not just on all of Canada, well, we've been paying attention to all of Canada's natural energy resources for a very long time, but we've been looking specifically at a national electrical grid for at least a decade, and we aren't the first. By all means, we are not the first. Others have been looking at looking at a national electrical grid for a very long time, and it's been promoted even between different provinces. There are right now some very minor proposals being worked on. We can certainly recall just over a year ago that there was an agreement between Ontario and Quebec to have a short additional transmission line between the two provinces that would help Ontario achieve some lower electrical rates for the citizens. But what is it that the Bowman Centre has contributed? Next, please. Back in 2012, we published a book that's available from our website, looking at a whole series of national energy opportunities, because we believe that once we start down this path, we are going to be achieving a trajectory towards a sustainable energy future. We know that Canada's electrical networks were historically designed and built province by province by visionary leaders, by the needs of the individual communities. And there has been very limited emphasis on provincial interconnections. So in our first work, we provide a scenario of 11 very specific steps to connect the provincial grids. These can be done in a logical sequence over just 17 years at a cost of about $25 billion. Not just the hundreds of billions of dollars, as John was mentioning, for a whole new corridor, but just to be able to connect the existing corridors that we have to achieve a higher level of efficiency. Next, please. Just a couple of years later, we produced our second work, where we tried to tie the opportunities for electricity trade with Canada's trade through not just east-west, but being able to have better north-south work as well, because we recognize that, yes, we can fairly readily achieve a much lower greenhouse gas emission scenario for Canada, but we also have the opportunity and potentially as well the responsibility to be able to assist our neighbors to the south in the United States to retire a lot of their greenhouse gas emitting sources of electricity. We presented various case studies for hydropower generation, and not just to be able to focus on low carbon emissions, but to be able to set a trajectory to a complete low carbon economy. Next slide, please. We've carried on, and just last year, we recommended that we need to look not just at a hydroelectric system, but we need to be able to look at Canada as a complete integrated system. And yes, there are discussions and disagreements about what is truly meant by an integrated system, but we are proposing 3 fundamental value chains. And the first of these is a hydroelectric chain with high voltage, AC, high voltage, DC transmission for domestic and export markets. We are promoting certainly that the electricity system should include storage with hydrogen, with batteries, with pumped storage, and where necessary and appropriate, additional hydropower to provide energy for transportation. Now, we've also been promoting heavily, as Dr. Meisen is well aware, a lot of the non-fuel uses of oil sands bitumen. Next slide, please. This is a graphic that we shared on Earth Day just a couple of years ago in the Globe and Mail, looking at the 3 system chains from hydroelectric through electricity generation, through transmission to our domestic and export markets. We also need to make sure that we have hydrogen and batteries and hydroelectric dams with pump storage to make sure that we can provide power for future transportation. And we need to make sure that we recognize that the oil sands and hydrocarbons are not going to be going away anytime soon because of the derivative products. We feel there's a strong opportunity for value-added manufacturing to recognize the unique properties, particularly of oil sands bitumen, to get into durable goods. So speaking for a moment about the power for future transportation, we do know recently that there has been a push to make sure that the manufacturing capacity of Ontario can support electric vehicles, and an agreement was struck between Unifor and Ford of Canada to make sure that electric vehicle manufacturing will occur at some of the Ford facilities in Ontario. We know as well that Alberta Innovates has been promoting the extraction of vanadium from the oil sands bitumen to be used as a raw material for energy storage. We also are aware that because of the excellent work that 2 of our associates have done with me, Ed Brost and Peter Smith, both of whom are on this seminar with us, we can demonstrate that the number of electric vehicles will reach a tipping point within the mandate of most of our current federal and provincial governments. And so that the change in demand for fuels for transportation will be such that the hydrocarbon fuels are going to be diminishing in importance, but electricity will be increasing in importance. And we know as well right now that Alberta is very well positioned to be a fairly immediate supplier of hydrogen. But we also understand and are working with a couple of research partners to look at opportunities for hydrogen storage in the Southern Ontario area to make sure that that hydrogen can be used as a fuel and as a source of electricity generation close to the markets that are demanding it. Next slide, please. Having a complete electrical grid, a complete energy grid, will make sure that we can achieve some productivity improvements, because the 11 links that are highlighted from our 2012 book start out with the high productivity, high opportunity links, and then progress so that those links with lesser opportunities right now would be built later based on the productivity and the income that we would achieve from the high productivity shorter links. We also know that having a national electrical grid will be able to tap into the not just the hydropower, not just nuclear power, but also the disparate sources of renewable electricity, whether that be solar PV, whether that be geothermal, whether that be wind energy, because those are intermittent and more widely dispersed than some of the key point sources of electrical generating capacity we've tapped into right now. So having the dispersed sources of electricity being tied in will help avoid stranded assets. And as John has already pointed out, any kind of further connectivity between Canada can only assist with nation building. There's two aspects. One is to make sure that as we run links across the country between the national electrical grids, that we are gathering the best input that we can from those who have been the stewards of the land for a very long time. And we will be able to deliver to those people the kind of energy and connections to the fiber optic world and to the electronic world that is necessary so that we can reduce energy poverty as well as give opportunities for economic growth. The next slide, please. Where we are at right now at the end of 2020 is that we recognize that Canada needs a visionary leader, possibly multiple visionary leaders in the different provinces to take the steps to actually commence and then complete the construction. We know that adjoining provinces need to cooperate to connect their respective grids. In both those aspects, we understand that we have to avoid political debate, as John has said, because we need to, as we have discovered ourselves, we need to have all party agreement on the actions that are necessary, because the scope and scale of the kind of work we're talking about surpasses the mandate of any individual government. We also know, the third point here, that we have some technical and governance solutions that are needed to be able to manage the grid interfaces. As John pointed out, we need to somehow overcome the long lead times for infrastructure projects. We need to get started because we've done a tremendous amount of study right now. But we do know as well there are competing and conflicting scenarios, whether that be individuals, individual households, detached homes that are upgrading their own insulation and applying solar panels on the roof so that they can disconnect from the grid, or whether that be larger opportunities for a community to be built behind a gate, behind its own infrastructure systems. There are these competing and conflicting scenarios that will need to be acknowledged, addressed, and accepted. Next, please. We're very fortunate, all of us gathered here today, to know that we have some visionaries from the past who can give us some guidance, give us some counsel. We have both Clem Bowman and Dr. Richard Marceau. Unfortunately, Dr. Marceau passed away just 4 years ago this month, but their legacy continues. And certainly this is something that the Bowman Centre is going to continue to work on. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Marshall, for your presentation. And thank you also for the good work that the Bowman Centre has done and continues to do on these very important subjects related particularly to energy. Christine and Anne-Marie, is there maybe one or two questions that we can quickly pose and answer so we stay on time?
There is a question from Peter Smith. It's how would you propose that we route a corridor when a route that best suits, say, electricity would not be best suited transportation or communication, etc. All of these systems, sorry, my screen just, all of these systems have specific needs and may be best suited to different routes. Maybe I'll get Mr. Smith on the...
So it's a little bit of a complex question.
Yes, so I will just unmute him.
I'll let you think about it, Marshall, and if you can try and answer it briefly, and then we can pick up the answer again in the panel discussion that follows our next speaker.
Well, I would have to quote another CAE fellow and also the incoming president of the Canadian Society of Senior Engineers, Guy Van Oytven, who's very fortunately shared his expertise with the Bowman Centre for Sustainable Energy, that it's true that we cannot look at one corridor as a narrow corridor and put everything into that very narrow corridor. Rather, we need to look at a fairly expansive corridor because of the difficulties if we, for example, we're running pipelines and high voltage transmission lines through the same area. There can be interference with from the pipeline with the high voltage line. It's unclear to me as yet how we would, whether there would be substantial interference with fiber optic cable within a high voltage line. Certainly the challenge would be if we look at a large corridor, how do we make sure that there is enough space within there for all of the things that are necessary? The other point, as Guy has mentioned before, the sources of electricity are very different than the sources, for example, of hydrocarbons. So you can't expect that the corridors are going to be starting at each point source for electricity and hydrocarbon and converging at the area where there is demand. So yes, the setting of the direction, choosing the route for a corridor is going to be key, and there will be, I suspect, parts of the corridor that will be constrained, that will not accept everything that we're talking about in terms of infrastructure corridors.
Thank you, Marshall. I think that was a very rich answer, and obviously the question requires further consideration, and we will be able to give some attention to that here, but also beyond the seminar today.
I have no doubt that Peter will keep asking that question.
Okay, it's also the answers we are looking for. Okay, I would now like to call on our last speaker, who is Réal Laporte. Réal has extensive experience with very large electrical power generation and distribution projects for customers in the province of Quebec, neighboring provinces, and the United States. Réal has served as president of Hydro-Quebec's Innovation Equipment and Shared Services Division. He has overseen numerous hydro projects valued at about $15 billion in aggregate. And prior to the seminar, he told me of a remarkable achievement. This achievement is that nearly all projects, and there were about a dozen of them, were completed on budget, and those that ran slightly over budget were compensated by several others that came in under budget. So Réal, I'd like to invite you to give your presentation, followed by some questions and answers.
Thank you. Thank you. I will share just a moment, just a moment. Share screen. This one. So, sorry for the delay. Just to maybe to answer a quick answer on the telecom and high voltage. On the high voltage 735 kV in Quebec, the fiber optics is on the same pillar. So there's no issue on this, no technical issues on this for sure. And if we have other linear assets, it's going to be, let's say, some issues like pipelines or something like this. So it's going to have, we're going to need a large corridor for sure. But thanks for the invitation. It's the first time I speak to, I have the chance, the opportunity to speak to the Academy. So I'm a fellow since 1 year only. So thanks for the invitation. I quite agree with the presentation of Mr. McDougall and with the principle of corridor or a grid of corridor for development on the long time, especially for places where there's not too much development already, to be sure that we can reserve places, to be sure that we can put the infrastructure and construct the infrastructure. But at the same time, I think we're going to need to fix some let's say, installation for the parks, national parks, or things at the same time, because we're going to have to balance both sides on this. So if we develop a corridor for infrastructure, we're going to have to manage to have parks or biodiversity sites at the same time, because that's going to be one of the advantage of this kind of projects. I will talk as you understand a little more like a project manager or for the infrastructures, and I looked to this corridor as with this point of view. I really like what I heard about the way it's expected to be done. So with the First Nations and maybe I can emphasize on the thing was quite important to find promoters inside the First Nations, because they have to find what's in it for them by themselves, and having a promoter in our team, not only be consulted. After phase 1 of James Bay in Quebec and phase 2, and when we made the East Main projects in the early 2000 to mid 2010, we really appreciate the experiences the CREs of Quebec developed through the phase 1 and through the phase 2. And after that, they have some businesses right now, and that's true. Yeah, it can improve really the life of the First Nations. And now with the Great Alliance just signed with between the CRE and the government of Quebec a few months ago, the CRE were the promoters of this. And not only the get consulted in this project. So that's their project and our project at the same time, and we developed that. And I just talked with Secretary General of the Cree Nation of UHC Quebec a few days ago, and he talked to me that they had to choose with the community where they're going to make some development and where they're going to preserve the status of natural places. And that's what they made at the first time, at the beginning of the concretization of the Great Alliance. And I think that's why it's so important to have promoters internally in the First Nation by themselves and co-direct our initiatives. So these main projects, just to remember, these main projects was the projects right after Great Whale. So there was some issues of social acceptability by First Nation and Great Whale, as you know. And so we had a challenge there, and Cree leaderships, Quebec and Hydro-Québec, took the time to develop, let's say, a formal agreement with the specific functionality on an eventual project. And we speak with the Crees at the beginning, just to be sure that what do we want to be preserved as it is right now? Where can you go? What do you want to improve? And everything like this. And we put that in an agreement. And by there, we had a scope for our project. So it's quite important, the scoping, and to take the time to scope really, really early in the process. After that, we need to have quick win. So the problem with the large infrastructure is the timeline. It's always too long. And the opinion of people change with the time. The opinion of society, the leadership change. And it's hard to maintain a leadership for 15 years or 20 years. I don't know, but the kind of project who is proposed here, it's something like 25 years or something, I don't know. It's a real large project. So you cannot wait and make it in sequence, like doing the feasibility, pre-feasibility, feasibility, authorization all in one. Maybe we can get inspired by the Great Trail with something else, but they made that by part, and using the railway was abandoned to start to have trekking and the bicycling road. And when you look at I just had a map on this. When you look at this map here, it's the Great Trail. Oh, it's not too bad. So for sure, that's natural places, and that's for biking and hiking and these things. But it's probably the last coast-to-coast projects that we saw in Canada. And one of the success of this is nobody talked against this project while it was doing, and that was really community-based project. So there's something, and I think you're inspired by this, and that's what you talked about a little bit, but that's one success that we had in Canada with something. I don't think they have the same name in each provinces, like in Quebec, it's La Route Verte, so it's another name, but that was a little really community-based project, which is quite interesting if we want to be inspired by success like this. It's always interesting to see that. So as you can understand, the national corridor is a good idea from my point of view. There's a lot of place in Canada where there's no development right now, but there's a lot of objectives to be sure that we will be greener. We will have more biodiversity reserve and these things. And for me, it's the same project. It has to be part of the project. And it's always a big challenge to mobilize the people on this. But if you have promoters and we make a real community and country project, we can have a big success with that. The first thing we do when we do this kind of project, because it's a linear project, it's what we call a cadrage. I don't know, I tried to translate that in land valuation study, something like this. So you put the red point and orange point and everything. So you can draw what is valuable and what is important for local community and First Nations and everything. And there's going to be some kind of corridor, never linear, really, but you can attach this. And after that, address the points where there are some issues and addressing these ones. But you can have some kind of scientific approach. And this cadrage, or let's say, I will talk about a land valuation study, has to be made with the local community, First Nation, and non-First Nation, Allochton, we call it in French. And we have to fix these corridors with local experiences of the users, scientific records, and knowledge of the territory, because there's a lot of study who was already made a little everywhere in Canada on the territory. So it's really important to, if we want to have a big success with this kind of projects, and it's going to take a lot of energy for sure, but if we go by there, it's going to be really tabled on the actual, let's say, actual values of the society or emerging values of the society. And we're gonna need to have young people piloting that because it's gonna take 20 to 25 years to get there. And that's gonna, it's a project. If we can have leaders of 30 years old, we will put that to an end somewhere. And they're going to bring that. We can coach them. We can bring them. But we need them to take this project in their hand, and helping with our experience for sure. But I think that's going to be quite important. In parallel with the different level of governments, it can be helpful to plan, as I just said, but biodiversity reserves, extension of national park and provincial parks. I believe that this kind of project need to be an enabler for enhancement of societal assets at the same time that we're planning the use of land for the corridor of infrastructure to come. And for me, biodiversity reserve is an infrastructure too. So if we plan that like this, we're gonna have more people with us, and there's going to be more in the, if we want to make tourism, like say Nunavik or Nunavut or something like that, so you're going to need some road to get there sometime. So if you need the road, you're going to need a corridor to have the road to have access to the national park or the beautiful landscape that you can see. but to get there, you're going to need something like a corridor. So how can we manage that to be sure that we don't pass through, let's say, a valued place, but we can have access to these places? So, so it's a strange time to talk about tourism, but let's say it's gonna come again in the next weeks, I think, or in the next year for sure. So ESG, as I said, or everybody said, I understand, ESG is becoming more and more important for all the stakeholders. So people, government, businesses, and investors. Environmental impact and public perception are changing quickly. Just an event like the pandemic right now, or something else can be big, or with big impact, can bring the people to change their opinion. And it's hard to have a mobilization for 15 to 20 years and acceptance of a project for this. So it's quite important to have the more community-based approach, as I said, and to have quick wins, just as I said. So large-scale linear project, and that's one at the end. That's a corridor, but we can see that as a linear project. It's the hardest to develop right now, as you know. We have challenge with our transmission lines. New transmission lines especially, or increasing the capacity of existing corridor. So we have to remember something, that the best projects is the one we can deliver. Because if we start and having inflexibility in our coping, it's going to be really hard, and we're going to, let's say, give birth to an opposition there, and after that, it's bring out of control, or it's going to be really, really hard to develop. So it's really, I have an expression in French was we call a deuil rapide, so accepting that something will not be done fast as possible to be sure that we are doing and mobilizing the people in the good path where we have some new avenues. So if we're looking to vision and strategies for project, on my point of view, for sure, and it's not the only point of view we can have, and we can discuss on this, but what I understand, it's we want to connect the coast, occupy the land, open up access to the north. Remember that the information of on the project has to be disseminated, so it's have to be simple as possible. Often we make our projects too complicated to explain, and after that we have 15 people who talks about something different, and after that it's we have a hard time to reconciliate all what we talked about on different tribunes. So it needs to be crystal clear and ambiguous as possible, contribute to decarbonizing the country, and so the time frame has to be compatible with our commitments. With I think about the Accord de Paris, mainly 30% below 2005 by 2030 and 80% by 2050. We have a project on the front of us who can contribute to that, but the time frame is not compatible with this kind of maybe for 2050, but not for 2030. So we're gonna have to explain that as simple as this, clearly, and the people really like the frank speaking on this. The main objective of the transmission system, if I talked about this, have to be pinned down, as you talked before, balancing intermittent resources, base load sources, supplying capacity, addressing energy availability issues, what we want to do in that. If it's clear, we can have really different solution, depending on what we want to do, especially with the evolution, the fast evolution of the solar and the distributed resources and the wind farms, with the cost was going low and low now. I don't see in the project on the transmission line real technological issues with regard to facilities and equipment, but there's some issue for system management and protection system, as well as cybersecurity. So it's going to be quite important. There will be a real challenge in regard to profitability, especially for utilities and for the system management, because where you have a low cost, generally, if you share that with the province just beside you, that's going to higher your cost somewhere or in some way. So there's going to be some challenge, and I took that in a MIT publication that I have at the end. We talked about this for the South. How can we have a market to go to do the good thing? So power system, as you said already, have largely developed along north-south axis, and each one is different based on the current situation and how it seems likely to evolve. I believe we are heading for an approach where the projects share the same vision, but are carried out independently in each provinces or territory with involved stakeholder coordinating operation at border crossing, but with a time frame. And I think it's quite important, the time frame, because if you don't go at the same speed, there's going to be some investment for nothing. The other thing is, as a result, it's quite essential if we're making that by provinces, and we tabled on this to go faster for the suite, for the next steps, objective, vision, compatibility standards, and interface along with the time frame is very, very important to precise. What you talked about, vision and sense of direction and vision, I'm quite aligned with what you talk about. One thing to remember, there should not be any subsidies for power transmission, because that could make it impossible for utilities active in the US to export power south of the border. It's really, really important, and probably is one of the break why we don't have east-west interconnection between our grids, because most of the utilities, I know more Manitoba Hydro and BC Hydro and Hydro-Québec export a lot to the US, and we don't want to lose these revenues. So we're going to have to find a way to be sure that we will not be attacked on the subsidiaries, and that we can, let's say, stall our capacity to export. I've selected the next page. I selected a few studies that are quite interesting on the electric grid, the decarbonization, and the market. Electrical markets for sure. These studies show that these subjects are very intertwined and relatively dependent on each other. There is no big technical issues on equipment, as I said, the hardware side, but some issues will need attention and development, mainly on the digital management of the grid. We already had this kind of challenge in Quebec, because if you look at the grid in Quebec, we are like a Y, and it's not easy to balance these things, and it's quite long. So, but there's going to be more challenges. HVDC is quite a good solution to be sure that we can go fast from one province to another. These systems are required mainly to ensure an effective grid and help to integrate and optimize the demand, and the evolving portfolio of generation and storage solutions as electricity, hydroelectricity, solar, wind, reservoir, batteries, distributed generation, and energy efficiencies. The financial side of the efficiency of the market tools to stimulate the implementation of an efficient system in Canada is particularly critical. These tools will help to act as fast as possible to implement of adequate solutions for the grids, the decarbonization, and the stakeholders. I want to underline the excellent report made by our Academy in 2009 that really targeted what we consider urgent today with sound solutions. The delay occurred in the implementation of solutions like the one recommended in this report is something that we must be worried about. The corridor, I think, is a part of the solution of this, and the report you just talked before with just before me, that was a good example of what's happening, but it's quite hard to develop east-west corridor. It's so that's a big challenge, but I think it's a really, really nice project if we want to have a vision for the development and have to share more rich, more values than if that we have right now. So it's quite a good project. So that's it.
Réal, thank you very much for your presentation. As you can note, we're running a little bit late of time. So I would suggest that we address our first question to Réal, and then maybe other members of the panel might also want to ask that question. Let me start out by asking a question of all the panelists, but directed to you, Réal, first. Major infrastructure corridor projects are clearly multidimensional. They affect many regions, many communities, many business sectors, and many levels of government, to just name some. My question is, how do we prepare members of the engineering profession to manage such multidimensional projects when most of their education and often most of their interests are focused on technical matters? Could you try and answer that? And then maybe the other two panelists can join as well.
Yeah, just let's say that's something I'm in different chairs of research with KEOPS and Hydro-Québec, and we worked a lot on the let's say soft side of let's say project management. Often we talk about this side. It's quite important to understand the technical issues, but to have a really large understanding of the society and the technology, let's say, issues. But we need more and more as project manager and integrator, let's say. We integrate a lot of things, social, environmental, and technical part. And for me, the technical part is an answer to the social and environmental and technical issues. So the technical has to be a response of the other, what we have around. And the challenge are quite important in that. But how do you manage that is by example and to put people inside that. And they need to have at least a little capacity on interactivity with the people. And the youngest people in our teams have more capacity on this side than we had. Let's say I can appreciate their capacity to speak to the people, to speak on the front of people, and they have more competence on this, let's say. But it's a quite a big challenge to understand what to say and what to don't say, and how to change your project and these things. So you need to be exposed to these experiences to be good, to become good, let's say.
Thank you, Réal. Maybe Marshall, you'd like to answer as well, because you're teaching at Nipissing and other places.
That's correct. The Bowman Centre for Sustainable Energy has an ongoing long history, both with Western engineering and with Queen's University. We have been sponsoring specific projects, particularly through Queen's in what they call their TEAM program, which stands for Technical Engineering and Management, so that a group of students from different disciplines are assigned a project that they complete in their last year. And the work that they have done, certainly the work that we have arranged and sponsored with them, has been exceptional. Western University, their engineering program has a similar opportunity through their capstone engineering course, where again, a team of disparate people, not just engineers, are brought together to determine determine how they can best solve a project or deliver on a project. In each case, the students very rapidly learn all of the necessary soft skills, the necessary interconnection and relationship skills that they need to be able to achieve the project. And one of the things that I'm delighted to see is that the students that I've noted in these programs over the last decade have broken away from the typical student time management process of leaving everything to the last minute so they can do just 1 minute of work. The kind of work that we know needs to be done for long-term projects has to take, it takes a lot of planning, a lot of preparation, and a lot of cooperation. So that's, I think, one thing that we are doing to encourage younger people, particularly students, to be much more aware of the multidimensional aspects, as you were saying, Axel.
And John, you used to be a professor, but you still interact with the University of Alberta, and so you have a perspective on that as well through the lens of the infrastructure corridor that you are working on.
Yeah, a few comments. I mean, I would reinforce some that have already been made. For example, the importance of people who are integrators and who do have a bigger sense of the world. 25 or 30 years ago with what's now Engineers Canada, I remember we did a report on engineering the future, and we identified the fact that the social skills are very, very important. The specific technical skills tend to make up about maybe half of the way engineers are employed, but it's the other 50% who are reaching out and connecting to the people and understanding the marketplace and really getting their head around all of the consequences. It's funny, in innovation, for example, a bunch of us have kind of concluded from experience that innovation is 95% social and 5% technical. The technical is the enabler, but it, as Réal points out, has to be applied within needs, and needs are reflected by society. I would add one other thing, and that is that I think the faculties are improving a lot in this regard. And for example, a young Indigenous woman working with us on C2C2C has just taken on a role as Associate Dean at the University of Alberta, bringing Indigenous understanding and awareness to the students there, and also reaching out to help build capacity within the Indigenous communities. So you're starting to see some of this happen. I think the programs that many competitive elements that many of the students now are run through recognize the value of teams and varying strengths, as Marshall points out, that have to be brought together to be successful. I think that the academic world has moved a long, long way in the last 10 or 15 years. But the challenge, I would say, is the experiential need that has to be brought to bear, which is really living it and sort of growing into it at scale. I know on C2C2C, one of the things that we talk about over and over and over again is the complexity of what we're taking on. It's a very non-trivial problem because we're talking about multi-jurisdictions, we're talking about multi-cultures, we're talking about economic issues, we're talking about multi-sectors, it's a very complicated process and can only be done successfully with people who are pretty open-minded.
Yeah. Thank you very much to all three of you. Christine or Anne-Marie, are there general questions? I realize we only have a couple of minutes left.
Axel, it's Rob here. I just, Ravi had a quick question.
Sure.
And he threw a few numbers in. So what he was saying was on a national base of 69,000 megawatts, the east-west transmission backbone should have to be substantive to replace individual fossil plants through Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, Alberta, and to meet the various national time zone peaking requirements. So he said, did anybody have a bid for the size of the transmission grid, whether they were thinking of 10,000 megawatts, 20,000 megawatts? How, practically speaking, how big would this thing be?
Answer a little bit of that, if I may. In our first book published in 2012, we did in fact look at what the total thermal capacity for Canada was at that time. It's just over 35,000 megawatts. But I'll point out that that is not distributed evenly across the country, so that the actual capacity or the links to be able to replace that capacity would not necessarily be 10,000 megawatt or 20,000 megawatt for the entire backbone, but rather we're talking about just the interconnections between different grids to replace the thermal capacity.
Okay. I know, Guy, you probably have an answer, but let's try and do this quickly because it is technical and we are past our time. Guy, you have to unmute your mic if you want to be heard.
Yeah, okay, sorry about this. Yeah, this amount of power that will flow in that over that east-west connection is going to, will be in competition with the power that's going to flow from north to south. And I will ask Monsieur Laporte, Monsieur Beauchamp there, for example, what is most economical, selling energy to the States or to Ontario, if you can answer that?
I think that question was for Réal, I guess. Réal.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's depending of the hour of the day. For the answer, it's because you have an open market in the United States, and the nighttime is really cheap, especially since the shale gas was found. It's it's depending if the cost of the interconnection is socialized, or you have to internally to put that internally in the cost of the way. But for now, some hours are better in Ontario, but some hours are better in the States. It can be, let's say, the answer can be true in all the way. The problem now is the number of interconnection through the south of the water, and because to balance all the intermittent kind of energy, so solar and more solar and offshore wind and inland wind. So there's more and more need to have the capacity of reservoir in the south. So there's going to be let's say, probably a market will be open in the next years through the balancing, the capacity of balancing the grid, like an insurance, let's say. And after that, the other is the capacity to decarbonize. So the apport, so let's say a carbon market on this to be sure that everything is going to be covered inside that. With Ontario, we have some agreements, and there's some balance, some fluctuation in the price, but and in the capacity. But we have an interconnection which is not always used now between Quebec and Ontario.
Thank you, Réal. Christine or Anne-Marie?
Yes, Axel. We have Ed Bross who has a question, and then Andreas has his hand raised. If time permitting, then Andreas can then ask a question.
And then we'll, I think, close it off at that time.
So, Mr. Bross, you can either unmute yourself and ask the question, or I can read it for you. It's totally your choice. There we are.
Yeah. We talked about cooperation and we talked about jurisdictions, and it seems to me probably the biggest barrier we have to developing something like this is not technical. It's more to do with leadership. We need, and was mentioned, we need visionary leadership, we need courageous leadership, but the element that seems to be most lacking is cooperation. How do we get national, provincial, territorial, and Indigenous leaders to have a spirit of cooperation, to want to make this thing happen rather than look at their parochial or localized interests rather than a national interest? John.
Okay, I think that you've hit the heart of what has been top of mind for us right from the beginning. We've concluded that if you don't work with people to design their future, basically you're a peddler. And it's hard to get real cooperation, because if you're a peddler, you're in the movement of each side trying to get more out of the exchange than the other. But if you bring people together to design it together, then they're all trying to understand what's, if you like, what's in it for them, why it's important, how it can create value. And so, for example, on the team that we've been able to bring together, we've got a heavy Indigenous component with some just amazing people, some of them young enough to be able to see it through, which is also good news, according to Réal. We have been reaching out as broadly as we possibly can. We've made certain that that we're thinking about the longevity of it all. So we're talking an awful lot about capacity building to create in the areas that we want to see this happen in, the actually the capacity to participate in a meaningful way as part of this exercise. It's been, I think you've hit the Achilles heel. The way people cooperate is when they have common vested interest, and that's what we've got to be able to create.
Mm-hmm. And bringing these interests together on some kind of a common denominator. Correct. Without making them all the same.
Yeah, which the corridor is kind of the icon for doing it, yeah. Which is why we're not peddling projects. What we're peddling is an ability. So wherever you go, people have to say, how could this be beneficial to me? What would I use it for that would make it worthwhile?
Yeah. And you're promoting it at this stage as a concept rather than as a specific project. So
correct.
I will invite our last questioner. Can you remind me, Christine, who it was?
Yes, it's Andreas at the end. He's got his hand.
Yeah. Andreas, yes.
Thank you all for the nice presentation. One thing I want to mention first is that we have a webinar of the Canadian Academy of Engineering and our Center for Zero Energy Building Studies on October 16. Robert has already sent an email to everyone. I encourage you to participate. It's more building focused, resilient buildings. So one thing I want to mention is that I fully support this project. It's good for country building, and I think what can make it really move forward is to build some new towns along this corridor. So basically building some what I would call new green towns of the future with their microgrids, renewables, and everything, and to attract new people to move there, and maybe even some retired people. And with teleworking, now this is becoming more possible. So we shouldn't look at this as just an infrastructure project. There should be new buildings, new towns, new developments along these corridors. I mean, we have so much empty space in this country. So, we should see this as an opportunity to have some new ideal towns for our kids and our grandchildren. And it should be packaged like that in order to gain support. And by building these new communities along this corridor, it will help also to build the corridor and building essentially the chains or the pieces in the chain that connect the chain.
I think, Andreas, you raise a very interesting question, which probably was in the minds of some of the speakers, but wasn't specifically brought out. I would just comment historically, of course, Canadian towns were built along the railroad, along our important corridors.
So this has to be done again.
In a contemporary and in a different way. But I think it's a very nice segue to the next seminar that the Academy is offering, and I would encourage all of you.
In fact, if it is presented this way, it will gain a lot of support. So basically, the infrastructure supporting people and new developments with high quality of life, basically large houses, it will make it possible to have a different option than the densification where we pack people in apartments in a city center.
Yeah. Réal, I think you wanted to add a comment?
It's a good idea, but this kind of subject, John probably will say, will be, in accordance with me, it's quite important to talk this kind of issues with, or initiatives with the First Nations who are have some revendications of certain territories in all the Canada, because there's not a lot of things who are settled on this side. Mm-hmm. So this kind of things, it's if it's a part of a project, have to be in the definition of what's going to be in the corridor, like the transmission line, like the pipelines, like the train, or I don't know, like let's say the Hyperloop, or I don't know what. But everything with inside that. So because the choosing having corridors is choosing to have nothing outside of the corridor too.
Well, it's really, really important that you say that, because ultimately we're thinking about the development of the nation, and to bring all of those pieces together, you have to be talking about what it is that you're enabling, not just what goes in the corridor, but the things that ultimately drive the use of the corridor. Yeah. And that's not a trivial exercise, as we talked about before. That's why engagement starts as grassroots. And the other piece, coming back to leadership and vision, is the number of elections that will be held over the course of the 13 jurisdictions and the federal government as this goes forward. Tells you that this has got to be something that is a consensus view of the populace, or it's just going to run headlong into brick walls.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe this is a good point on which to conclude the panel discussion. We're not talking about a trivial project. We're talking about a big project, a project that is worthy of very careful and multidimensional considerations. So as I conclude, let me thank our three speakers, John McDougall, Marshall Kern, and Réal Laporte, for having shared their experiences and their ideas. I also wish to thank them for the work that they have been doing over the years for the CAE, our engineering profession, and indeed our country. So with that, I'd like to pass the microphone to Sahil Askapur, the President-elect of the Canadian Academy of Engineering. Sahil?
Thank you, Axel. I hope you all enjoyed today's great presentations as much as I did. It was really good. Special thanks to Axel. You did an outstanding job chairing and facilitating discussions, so thank you, Axel. I would also like to thank and express my appreciation to John for an outstanding, informative, and thought-provoking presentation. A special thanks to our other panelists, Marshall and Réal, for their great presentations. Last but not least, I would like to express my appreciation to you, our audience, for your active participation and asking great questions. As John stated, we are faced with numerous issues, including climate change, population growth, global migration, urbanization, and water shortages. The presentations from John on the Northern Infrastructure Corridor, from Marshall on a national electric grid, and Réal on ECG and importance of engaging communities early in the life of project. They are all each elements of creating sustainable economic prosperity for Canada in considerations of the 4 Ps: helping our people, our planet, providing economic prosperity for all, and providing reasonable profitability for investors. I would like to say the word reasonable because the economic growth model has failed to provide proper wealth distribution to the point that the top 26 richest people in the world have more wealth than the bottom 3.4 billion people. We need to pursue economic prosperity in a way to ensure proper distribution of wealth in harmony with other considerations which we talked today. What you heard today is the first of many webinars we have planned for you on various topics, such as net zero by 2050, challenges and opportunities of digital innovation, and many more. These webinars are targeted to connect ideas, people, projects, to emerging holistic and all-inclusive solutions and strategies towards sustainable economic prosperity. Ed, you actually nailed it when you talked about cooperation. This is really the key, and actually this is what you guys as the member of CAE can start with. So I would like to invite all of you to get engaged with various initiatives. Your expertise and deep knowledge will help our country, our people, and planet. I think what I would see here is that by getting you guys engaged and start collaboration, then hopefully we can start doing more work in that area. The next event is planned to be held on October 16 on the CAE roadmap to a resilient, ultra-low energy built environment with deep integration of renewable in 2050. Please note that if your friends were not available to attend today's virtual event, all of the presentations were recorded and will be available on the website. Have a great afternoon, and this event is now adjourned. Thank you very much. Thanks.